Hello everyone. Thank you for attending. Not only tolerance is one of the themes inherent in my presentation, but also since I have been frequently told by friends how difficult it is to tolerate me, I have decided to keep a proper distance and be only virtually present. So apologies for that. A good thing about virtuality is that you can stop me simply by pressing bottom whenever you got bored. The title is Unknown Knowns of Architecture, Reconstitution of Vitality in Boston City Hall Plaza. I'm a PhD student at North Carolina State University, and my name is difficult to pronounce, but something like Ehsan. Let me first set the stage for what I want to argue. We might think of buildings primarily in relation to their use. This is a hotel, this is a house, this is a museum. What I would like to discuss here is that architecture reflects more on social phenomena rather than on its immediate use or functionality. How? While we as human subjects either surrender, resist, dismiss, or repress social antagonisms, and all that can be called the real condition of existence, architecture nonetheless functions as a mirror. It reflects on that which has been repressed. Through its mute language, architecture is capable of embodying social predicaments. Quote from Zizek. Recall Wittgenstein's motto, what we cannot directly talk about, it can be shown by the form of our activity. What the official ideology cannot openly talk about can be shown by the mute signs of a building. End of the quote. In this sense, architecture is a medium expressing collective discontents. The difference between us that build the environment is that we as humans might be able to cover up psychic symptoms, disguising them, or simply not being aware of their existence within us. Architecture can't help but divulge the secret. An example. There was a wonderful historical neighborhood at the heart of the Boston, Massachusetts, officially dating back to 1838, almost 2 centuries ago. Before being named Scalia Square, it was home to the elite and ruling class. They abandoned the area 2 decades later, so the businesses in the square were adopted to meet the needs of the immigrant class. By the 1880s, it was the center of commerce in Boston. Almost after a century of economic and cultural vitality, the area began to lose its vigor. By the 1950s, Boston was in a state of economic decline. Trouble on multiple levels. Quote, residents, manufacturers, and businesses were fleeing the city, leaving behind acres of empty lots and boarded up buildings. End of the quote. The city came to conclusion that the neighborhood's undesirable condition had left no option but its demolition. Was erasing all the symptoms the right solution to the urban ailment? Or perhaps another question, should have all the failures of social, economic, and political system been blamed on physical structure and the neighborhood? Apparently, all those who needed to decide about the demolition were fully convinced. For better or worse, more than 1,000 buildings were demolished and 20,000 residents were displaced. Doesn't this already sound suspicious to you? Revitalization of Boston needed a physical structure. In 1961, the city of Boston commissioned the design for a master plan of the 64-acre district at the central West End neighborhood and Scalia Square. The urban renewal project, called Government Center Urban Renewal Plan, and backed by 40 million in federal funds. The design has been entrusted to the well-known IMP architects and partners. The center accommodated multiple governmental, civic, and municipal buildings, as well as restoration of its historical sites. The centerpiece of the IMP's plan was the City Hall building. In late 1961, the city released the documents for the City Hall competition. 256 entries received, and a controversial project by 3 young architects garnered the most attention. Notice the pride and the enthusiasm in this 1964 advertisement. The solution has been found, a paragon of architectural avant-garde, an audacious version of brutalism. Architects have unanimously declared the building to be a refined symbol of the most paradigmatic modernist design principles, quote, often called the best public building of our time, end of the quote. How was the project received by the Boston dwellers by people who would use the space. Here is a quote. Quote, many regard the building as unwelcoming, cold, and ugly, end of the quote. Interestingly enough, those who work inside were complaining about its poor lighting, ineffective heating system, and labyrinthine layout. As Big Wasek wrote in 2006, quote, it is as if the space were calibrated to render futile any gathering, large or small, attempted anywhere on its arid expanse. All the nearby buildings seem to be facing away, making the plaza's 11 acres of concrete and brick feel like the world's largest back alley. End of the quote. One would ask then, how to radically oppose positions? Why this simultaneous love and hate? The project had at its disposal all the means for success: political will, social enthusiasm, financial resources, acute designers. But why does this failure? It is certainly inadequate to rely solely on evident causes and surface phenomena in order to disclose this origin of this failure, although going beyond the surface might reveal certain truths about gentrification, segregation, financial benefits, political demonstrations, but still there remains aspects which cannot be revealed by going deeper. We need an entirely different way of seeing. What do I mean by this? We have surface level phenomena. Those which are obviously apparent, the replacement of an old deterritorial neighborhood with the new one. Second, there are also deep-level cause and effect relations, those which are not immediately apparent. For instance, demolition of the old neighborhood eventually and inevitably will result in gentrification of low incomes and unprivileged communities, a phenomenon typical of many urban renewal projects. But what about the residue? The remainder after the two above-mentioned conditions, the inaccessible dimensions of reality. We might call it repressed discourse. But how can we access this stuff? The unconscious talks and thinks, and the analyst in psychoanalysis decodes its meaning through analytical methods and linguistic structures. But how can we apply this logic to architecture? Let's agree with Charles Jenks and George Baird, along with other linguists, Eisenman, Michael Hayes, Jorge Silvetti, that architecture is a semiotic system where its signs are not necessarily bound to a predetermined meaning. The same way that an analyst interprets the mutually exclusive proposition of a patient, one can read contradictory signs in a building as symptoms. There is a wonderful example used by Freud in jokes and their relation to the unconscious. He refers to the story where someone was accused by his neighbor of having returned a borrowed kettle broken, while giving mutually exclusive and contradictory excuses. First, I never borrowed the kettle from you. Second, I returned it unbroken. Third, the kettle was already broken when I got it from you. Let's enumerate the contradictory propositions in the plaza. While the plaza was meant to serve the public, but as we all know, an open space is not conducive to an active public space unless it bears certain spatial qualities and also supportive uses. It is not a surprise that the plaza is suffering. There are no cafes, no activating uses associated with the space, no sheltering structures, absolutely no excitement. In 2006, the single entertaining feature, a pie-shaped sunken sitting area with a large fountain, has been paved over with concrete, simply because it had leaking problems. But are we to believe this? The plaza's mutually exclusive statements, yes, public, but not too public, welcoming, but only in certain ways, is analogous to contradictory statements in Dream, which gives the analyst the clues to interpret the unconscious symptoms. The formalities of an ideal institutions, and remember them, organized, rigid, and in some cases machinic, is in blatant contradiction with the playful and arbitrary nature of active public spaces. The space in front of the government building exemplifies this incompatibility. As if the rectilinear open area is merely a leftover putting up an appearance which symbolizes the generosity of official governing system in providing public space. You want public space? You'll get it. It is easy to read the mind of space managers here. If the space would be too inviting and comfortable to everyone, it means that it is inviting to homeless too, or back to the pool could have city officials tolerate what appears to them as an obscene scene where adults dipping their feet into the pool as high officials are heading to a meeting. Cities' official governing institutions with liberal egalitarian values aim to represent democratic openness. But what has remained from this quasi-utopian impulse is a symbolic gesture, a pure, sterile image. The representation of democracy is provided by the realm of appearance, where real hierarchies and exclusivities are dissimulated by an untroubled, sterile image of public space. Let's move one step further. Characteristics of many urban renewal projects are obliged to include certain themes, memories, elements, those whose existence are not part of their ideal ego. Deleuze called it, and Gilles Deleuze called this forced appropriation disjunctive inclusion. The relative steep slope of the Plaza, quote, intended to recall Bacon Hill's historical brick streetscape, end of the quote. And even worse, quote, the design was based upon the Piazza del Campo in Siena, Italy. But why? Another layer of contradiction is even more pressing as we look at the building's mixed language. One would immediately ask what the solid bases and surrounding walls are doing here. It is interesting to know that the initial sketches was strictly following Le Corbusier's pilotis. Columns have been holding simple boxes above, providing a seamless ground where no physical barrier obstructs the flow of movements. But doesn't this undesirable presence of solid wall functions as a symbol? The predicament of City Hall resides in the failed attempt in creating a balanced harmony between the modern transparency and the closeness of these solid walls, where the Victorian red brick of Scully Square has returned in the guise of a symptom, hunting the project with a suppressing presence. Suddenly, a fortress-like brick wall haunts their drawing and eventually the project. How then to justify this? Another way to analyze this contradiction is through the incommensurability between the modernist principles and the return of the repressed of pre-modern or pre-avant-garde architectural elements. Anthony Widler identifies three domains for such repression: solid bearing walls providing traditional privacy, the bourgeoisie house and its kitsch-like trappings of home, and third, the object of everyday life, which, however mass-produced, are still adorned with ornaments and, quote, encrusted with historical references. Widler reflects on the uncanny return of the pre-modernist spaces as an, quote, uneasy recognition of the presence of an absence, end of the quote. Here, the solid podium and heavy base, which in their antagonism with the grid of columns disrupt the ground level's openness, are emblematic of such a return. Not only the brick walls stifle the openness of the inner courtyard, it also frustrates the visual connectivity. But are these claims about the inherent contradictions are pure speculations? Thilo Schaubert, in his 1989 book, Boston Politics, The Creativity of Power, investigates the false claim about democratic values of the design. Quote, the mayor's office and the city council chamber are visible to all and directly accessible by a large stairway from the entrance hall, end of the quote. He elaborates on how transparency and unmediated access have been constantly filtered, concludes that, quite contrary to the premise, quote, architecture is used to protect the office of the Boston mayor against the public view. The design program of Plaza embodies a repressed desire for hierarchy and order. The transparency of mayor's office was meant as a metaphor for democratic transparency, yet its placement does not allow any views in. Rather than exposing the internal mechanisms in action, transparency simply provides a proper appearance. What about the style? The connection with Le Corbusier's Sainte-Marie de la Tourette is quite evident, particularly in the way that the three upper floors hovering over the slender concrete piers, as a project that has been completed 1 year before the competition. One should ask, why brutalism? The point here is not merely formal, but precisely ideological. The decision to make the building, according to the style appealing to government institutions, has been the emblem of architectural political correctness. Remember, the brutalism of the 50s and 60s was the official style for progress, democratic inclusivity, public service, and political transparency. Getting to the conclusion, within the ongoing discourse on revitalizing the space, there are some explicitly design-oriented attempts. The contribution on two levels. First, provocations from competitions, usually students. Second, commission and sponsored project. First, students. They stripped some of the basic design underpinning of the projects, namely the spatial order and functional arrangement. They moved them around. They also questioned certain taken for granted assumptions, such as the impossibility of appropriating part of the state-owned property. Despite their different design outcomes, all the competitions, the solutions fall in the same categories. The problematic of edge condition, brutality of solid falls, and the lack of activating uses. The solutions, of course, more transparency, attenuation of the threshold, and adding more activating use. But the question is that how serious those contributions has been taken. In 2010, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency commissioned a comprehensive report, EPA, commissioned a comprehensive report to design a vision for City Hall along the incremental steps to revitalize the plan. The EPA also sponsored a 3-day design workshop which brought together a remarkable number of experts from different fields to share their ideas on the reconfiguration of Plaza. Another one, in 2015, the City of Boston announced the Property and Construction Management Department to commission 3 firms to collaborate on the plan. Again, the design solutions did not go much further than promoting vegetation and lighting, adding trees. It was already Rem Koolhaas who argued how the generic concept of green space was the residual holding the modern space together. Here's a quote from Koolhaas. Quote, "In the original model of the moderns, the residual was merely green. Its controlled neatness, a moralistic assertion of good intentions, discouraging association use." End of the quote. Aren't we returning to that model? Aren't those elements and schemes promoting new residual, a hybrid of politics and landscapes? Now, conclusion. The fact that all the efforts of large group of intellectual and designers merely resulted in adding more trees into the plaza affirmed that there is no desire for real change. The authorities pull all their efforts to service the public, apparently engaging them in decision-making, participation, etc. Nonetheless, it is the city who eventually decides what the authentic needs are, but more importantly, what the public should desire. To serve the public, the ruling officials need to an unbridgeable gap, an imaginary distance between themselves and the public, externally organizing the flows of public's desire within the provided structures. This is the central theme for Deleuze and Guattari Anti-Oedipus, where they argue that capitalism constantly generates new axioms or add to the existing ones. If for the 1960s the axiom of the ruling ideology was a democratic state apparatus, today the axiom is sustainability. Scott Cohen and Eric Konaginski made a wonderful comment. Quote, "Just as religion is the opium of masses, sustainability is now the opium of architects, city planners, and technocrats." End of the quote. Despite all the affirmative evidence that the plaza needs a radical transformation, the collective unconscious of official agencies and the mentality of design coalitions have not yet come to believe that the primary problem is ideological. I will conclude with a joke which makes the point clear. A man who believes that he is a kernel of corn goes to a psychiatric clinic. After a month of thorough treatment, finally is convinced that he's a man. Allowed to release and go out of the asylum, he immediately runs back terrified and trembling, telling psychiatric that there is a chicken outside, and he afraid to be eaten. The psychiatrist replied, "But why you are afraid? You know that you are a man and chicken will not eat you." He says, "Yes, of course I know that I'm a man, but does the chicken know?" So, beliefs are unconscious, and those who should believe don't want to believe. Thank you very much.